Okay, so I actually want to dig into a bunch of things from your latest podcast. Again, I think if you are a fan of the UFC, you should obviously already be subscribed to the show, the You're Welcome podcast. But okay, it seems like my read from listening to you is you're giving a lot of credit to Jon Jones in the way that he's handling all of the things that are surrounding him right now, that he's got some galaxy brain stuff going on. Are you sure you're not projecting? Are you sure you're not thinking about this the way that you would be thinking about his right now legacy, but also his plans for the future?
Yes, or at least objectively, I have considered that. I do, and I have a different approach than him. So, yeah, I do feel like this is sitting back and studying Jon. Just by example, Jon has got to be the victim. He has got to be the good guy that's going to come in and save the day, and that's hard to do. You know, the people look at him with such reverence. People call him the greatest of all time. The boss calls him the greatest of all time.
A lot.
But that's a hard place to fight from. That's a challenging place because what do I get? If I'm not getting praised by people and a pat on the back on the way out, then what am I doing here? And so he's got to create that environment. And I do feel like he's trying to create that, and he's doing a good job of it.
So you feel as though all of this heel stuff is not at all genuine, Jon? That this is like put on Jon?
Yeah, to a degree. Like, if I can give you an example, there was a press conference yesterday. The big fight, they're holding this fight of Stipe versus Jon. One guy hasn't fought in 3 years, and the only guy's only fought once in 4 years. They're holding this fight to set up the next fight. Yeah. It's with Tom Aspinall, who happens to be an interim champion, who happens to be come fight time in the front row, and it's just supposed to cause an organic face-off, of which Jon is currently refusing to do. And I'm just suggesting the psychology behind that isn't that Jon isn't going to fight Tom. It's that he doesn't want to take on a second battle when he's trying to focus on Stipe. It's actually very mature of Jon from a professional standpoint to stay focused on what's in front of him.
That's fair. Can I just say that there's 2 fights this weekend, right? 2 big fights, but that they kind of feel similar to me in that it's an old guy that I don't think has a good shot to win against a younger guy who used a lot of steroids. I don't really care about this fight. And I'm talking about the Jon Jones one, that this was supposed to feel like, hey, the way they're billing it is it's the greatest heavyweight of all time versus Jon Jones. And here's his opportunity to really cement himself as the greatest of all time. And it just doesn't resonate with me. And I think that a lot of the reason that everyone is talking about Tom and Pereira and all this other stuff is that this one isn't really hitting that way in terms of people buying the narrative that you need to get people invested in this fight. And I'm curious if you think that this was a miscalculation by the UFC or this was a miscalculation by Jon. Like, did they misread the market, or was this just something that they needed to do? Like, where are you at with why this fight even happened?
I wish somebody would get asked that question, because you are completely correct. And I've even seen Dana struggle at times for telling us why we're here.
Yeah.
And it really is a confusing one. Listen, this started in March, and not March of 2024, March of 2023. And it was supposed to be Stipe and Jon. There was talk of Francis. They settled for a guy named Surreal that never belonged in there. Okay, great. When March gets done, we're going to move into International Fight Weekend, which is summer. And Jon and Stipe have agreed to fight. They've even advertised to the public that they have the fight. That comes and goes. There was no talk by the actual organization of doing that. We moved to November of last year. They signed the fight yet again. And yes, people were hot for it. But in the meanwhile, after that fight got canceled and pushed for an entire year, which brings us to right now, a guy emerged called Alex Pereira, and a guy emerged called Sergey Pavlich, who is also burned out by now, but then a guy emerged called Tom Aspinall, and all of them appeared by the public standards to be more sought after than the fight that we have, which is Stipe. So it was a matter of, okay, this was hot at one point. We promised it to the public. We're going to keep it together, but I'm with you. I don't completely know why.
I don't think most people would realize that Stipe hasn't fought in 3.5 years. Like that that's a retirement, brother. Like, that's a long time. And yeah, I don't know. I would like to believe that we're overlooking him to a certain degree. I'm sure that motivates him. But yeah, I don't have a lot of confidence that he's going to go in there and look awesome. And it reminds me again a little bit of boxing, where this is basically, to me, a version of Pacquiao Mayweather, right? We wanted it. And then by the time we got it, we were like, oh, one of these guys is real old. and this isn't all that fun. And this is actually kind of something else about the UFC is John's talking about super fights, right? And you do a good job outlining on your podcast as to like why maybe he is playing it a certain way and him trying to pick between these two guys that do represent real challengers that the public cares about. But I'm a little concerned about this fight just from the what this could mean for the greater UFC in general when you do have the stars and the way that they are treated. Not like that hasn't always sort of been the case, but the beauty of the UFC when it really did start stealing audiences from boxing, or at least incentivizing people to watch this over it, was, hey, you are always going to get the best guys fighting. Hey, this is one where you can't duck. This is not one where you can keep the belt for a long time and just not have to fight the best on best. We are going to pay off the fans with the best on best. And I'm a little bit more nervous, I think you are, with the Jon stuff, that he's not going to pay this off with a fight against one of those other two guys after this.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And I tend to think that he will. I mean, Jon is in an interesting spot with the victory over Stipe and that he's the champion. And the reason that's interesting is the organization has showed we'll move on with how to. That is what the entire demonstration of the interim champion, bringing him out here. He's not even fighting, but he's in the media mecca. They're giving him big opportunities. Like, they are preparing for a Jon exodus. And when Jon finally realizes that, I think that's going to sober up a little bit. But I don't disagree with any of your points. And if I could tell you this about Stipe, the greatest thing to know who's better is head-to-head competition. But the next best thing is common opponents. And I spoke to Daniel Cormier, who fought Stipe 3 times and he fought Jones twice. And Daniel does believe Jon's going to win the fight. But he does get stuck when you ask him how. And historically, the only way Stipe has ever lost is if you shut him off. Yep. He does not quit. The judges don't go against him. He doesn't fade as the night goes on. If you can knock him out cold, the referee will stop the fight. And I believe that's happened to him 3 times, but those are monsters that put him down. Meanwhile, I don't believe Jon has ever had a knockout. He's had TKOs, but I don't believe he's ever hit somebody and knocked him out. I've fought Jon. I've been hit by Jon. He's very damaging because he'll hit you with elbows. They cut you and they slice you, but he's not a hard puncher. So if he can't out-punch Stipe, there is a little bit of a question of, well, how's he going to do this? And his wrestling, I don't think, is going to work. If I was to compare his fights with Daniel and Stipe's fights with Daniel just on the wrestling, it was about even. As a matter of fact, Jon had 2 takedowns over Daniel. Daniel never got Jon down. Stipe had 2 takedowns on Jon. Jon got Stipe down once. And I'm just sharing. I mean, that was about an hour and a half collectively of fighting. I think they're close in some ways. And if I could just throw one other thing at you that might be enticing is Stipe is going to weigh 17 pounds more for this fight than he did for his last fight. And he did spend a period of time, he's been out for 3 years, like you said, but he spent a period of time trying to gain muscle because he thought he was drawing back into Francis Ngannou. He was never planning on somebody the size of Jones. I think that is a little bit, no matter how small, but advantage Stipe.
This is my only real counter to that, though, is so I'm 37 now. If you ask me, and I work out, I don't train. I work out, and I've noticed lately I get hurt more. And when I do get hurt, things don't come back the same way as they once did. How old are you? You're like 44, 45? You're in that range?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So, yeah, how much did your body change between, those 3 years from 39 to 40? Like or sort of 40 or 39 to 43. For Stipe to be off this long and to be this much older and to be in this range, like this guy is not LeBron James. He's not the greatest freak of nature when it comes to the athletics. I just don't know if we're going to be he can add all the muscle he wants. I think that the lights go out easier as you do age, and especially after you've taken more damage. And I also just think that the relying on the cardio and the agility and all of the things that he's going to need to beat a guy like Jon Jones, that those things I would guess are going to dissipate maybe a little bit more than we are saying they will.
Yeah, well, there's truth to that. And we talk about the lights going out. One thing that helps the lights to stay on is size. I mean, Jon's not a big puncher to start with, but the more muscle, they call it your ass, but the bigger you are from the hips down, your legs can really absorb some of that shock of a punch better. And I'll also share with you, well, everything you said about Stipe is true. It's got to be true about Jon. You've got Stipe, who's 41 years old, but he's a fireman. He's a father. He's home every single night, dinner and bath time with the family. You got Jon that's 37. But he's been on and off steroids. He's been on and off cocaine. He's currently on booze and is never coming off that. I mean, that it's an old 37. When you there's a few things that will age you, and nothing like cocaine, lawsuits, and fist fighting.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, they got to be the same age in dog years, or at least close.
Yeah, he's got like the holy triumvirate of aging. Those are the three pillars of doing it more quickly. Yeah, I'm with you on it. Okay, what about, so this part of it though is, doesn't he kind of need Stipe to look good? Because if he goes in there and Stipe looks bad, this sort of results in what you're talking about, which is Jones still does want praise. That's very clear. I'm guessing that Dana handles it this way because he knows this is a guy who wants pats on the back. Jones talks about himself and is willing to wear the goat shorts because that's what he wants everybody saying. And yet if he goes in there and just starches Stipe and Stipe looks old and stiff and bad, that this sets up Jones to only have to do more hard work. And that this is going to follow him around, this kind of talk, for at least another year.
Yeah, tough spot. It's a very tough spot for Jon. And even the stuff that he's got to be up against Aspinall, that he must fight Aspinall or it's not a true championship. And, man, that stuff's tough. I'm a big Tom fan. Tom is 3-1 in his last 4. I don't remember a time that Jon Jones lost. In fact, some people debate whether he's ever lost. So I do think it's a little bit tough what he's up against. You know, he's this older dog that's been there and done that. You got a guy that's had some pretty light competition in comparison to Jon, and he's 3-1 out of his last 4. Yeah. It's a funny world that we live in, but there is something to be said for willingness. Tom would get in and fight Jon tonight. Jon would not show up and fight Tom tonight. I think that favors Aspinall when you're talking about public opinion and willingness and courage. We got Mike Tyson versus Jake Paul going on. I'm glad you and I aren't talking about it because there's a silliness to that. But this concept is still the same, which is Jake Paul really will get in there with the absolute best guys. That makes people very angry. They don't want to credit this old Disney star that he's a very legitimate tough guy. Meanwhile, Tyson, who is almost the face for legitimate tough guys, has to really pick his spots. It's just a different time in life, and you do get favored a little bit if you have that courage and that willingness.
Yeah, I don't give a lot of credit. Sorry, that's not true. I give credit to it because it's still Jon Jones and it's still Mike Tyson. So there is an element of the courage that's like beyond my comprehension, right? But so I'm a big hockey fan. This is Canada, after all. We have a history of fighting in the game that is pretty extensive. And my team, the Toronto Maple Leafs, used to have a fighter by the name of Ty Domi. I'm guessing, do you know who that is?
Ty Domi? No, of course not.
Yeah, all right. Well, he's kind of like the fighter, you know, like one of the more popular guys that has been known in the sport. Anyways, Ty was one of the greater fighters that the league's ever seen. And what made him great too was that he was undersized and he would fight even bigger guys. And at the end of his career, as he was starting to age and obviously not himself, you'd start to see some of the younger tough guys chase him around. And there was one time specifically where I watched a player named Chris Neal just really like chase him around the ice and dogging him. And people went like, oh, he's afraid to fight him. And I went, yeah, sure. He's afraid to fight this guy now who's 6'4", you know, double his size when he's 38 years old. He doesn't want to give him a go. And it's weird that we don't apply this at all, like this, seemingly anyways, this logic to watching UFC fights where Jon Jones, I understand why he would want to duck Tom Aspinall, that he would be turning the old 39 that you mentioned, that Tom Aspinall is hitting his prime of primes, and that this somehow would be like an accurate measurement of where Jones is at, or that he has to fight him. To me, the Pereira one is far more interesting in terms of, you know, just like age, actual size, just the momentum that is behind Pereira. But the Aspinall one, as much as I hate not getting best on best, and that ultimately if you want to be the greatest heavyweight or you want to be in that conversation, sure, that's the one you got to have. But I don't know. I kind of feel like this is crazy to say, but that people aren't being very sympathetic to Jon in that regard.
Yeah, and you make a good point. I mean, here, let's just break this down because there can only be two outcomes, right? If Stipe wins, Stipe wakes up on Monday morning with the headline saying he is the greatest heavyweight of all time. He's off into retirement. We wish him well. We hand him his flowers. He'll have beaten Daniel Cormier. He'll have beaten Francis Ngannou. He'll have beaten Jon Jones. Yep. But he doesn't fight Tom Aspinall.
Yeah.
Why is it not questioned for Stipe? He didn't get in there with Pereira or Aspinall, these current guys. But if Jon wins and doesn't fight one of those guys, he's a coward. Yeah. That is what the headline's going to say. It isn't quite the same standard. I can't tell you completely why it's a different standard, but it is the perception of Jon that he is still that young lion. I don't think people realize he's 37 and off the steroids. That's a hard thing to do. You asked me about coming back. I had to do comebacks. That first one back's a very difficult walk. And I've also had to come back off of steroids. That's a very difficult thing. I mean, there's a reason they call it performance enhancing. It makes you better. So if you're not taking it, you're also dealing with the physical, but the psychological side of how am I going to do when I don't have my magic juice? And it's a very real thing.
So do you think Jones has handled this well in terms of the way that all this stuff has come at him? Because to a lot of people, including myself, it really does seem that he's like, yeah, I don't want the Tom fight. You seem more optimistic about it. But what do you think the UFC would prefer? Like, if they get one more fight out of Jon and they are looking for super fights and they are looking for the most money, is that Aspinall or is that Pereira?
Yeah, so, and that's all up to the public. And the public is very fickle. And the public 1 year ago, it was neither. It was a Russian fighter named Sergey Pavlich. At this very time, that was the boogie monster. He was like 31-1. He knocked out 6 men in a row, all inside of the first round. Now, I watched all 6 of those fights, and I could not produce a single name of one of those opponents, but this was still the scenario. Tom gets in, comes into Sergey. He's 1-1 in his last 2, but he puts Sergey out in the first round. Now, all of a sudden, Tom becomes the guy. But if you fast forward, I do think it's Pereira. And Pereira's playing a little bit nice. Pereira even put something out on social media. And these little things go a long way in our industry that is largely ran by social media. And Pereira put out a thing, and it was a message to Jon, wishing him luck and saying, let's not fight. Let's make them wait for it a little bit longer. And that really takes a lot of the wind out of the sails. You know, had Pereira spoken up and said, no, I'm the guy, I think it would build something very big for Pereira. I know that the UFC I'll give you some scoop behind the scenes. A fight that they are trying to get done is Pereira versus Aspinall. And the winner would draw into Jon Jones. And it's one of these things where these guys really aren't playing it right. However, that is still a very big fight. It's just not as big as it could be. So to your question straight up, who could build it? Who could Dana have? Dana wants Aspinall, and therefore that's probably your answer. But I'm not positive the public wouldn't want to hear the case of Alex Pereira versus Jon Jones.
I think that in terms of the ceiling of what people will care about, Pereira's is higher. And so if you were talking about like in wrestling, they always want to put the next guy over, right? Well, when you're dropping the belt, it's the next guy. And Pereira is just that to me. Like, he's got the aura. He's got all of the things around him. He's the number one guy right now for the casuals, where it's like, yo, there's a Pereira fight right now. That's who they want to see. And I like Aspinall a lot. I think that he's doing his best now to make this Jones thing happen and to agitate him and get back into the public eye. He's exciting. I think he's a great heavyweight. This is not disparaging against him at all. It's just that, to me, I would rather have the Pereira-Jones thing. Just the size of the two, the ability of the two, the way that they match up, the timelines, all of it just makes way more sense to me, personally. That's just what I would be weighing in the room.
And all the excuses are gone as well, right? You have the greatest light heavyweight, and then all of a sudden, will Dewey or is Pereira the greatest light heavyweight?
Exactly.
They're both moving up to heavyweight. They're both small. But to your point, JD, and maybe in front of everything, they're both 37.
Yes,
and that really does change things. When you're both the same age, you just took the majority of your ability to make an excuse for legacy. You can't be the greatest of all time if you're not the greatest of your time.
Yep.
And 37 versus 37 is your time.
That's it, man. So to me, it's like sports are all about stakes, right? That's why I don't care about the fights.
Thank you.
It's like, I need the stakes. If you're telling me what they are and I don't know what they are, then yeah, I don't know. It just doesn't resonate the same way. So to me, like, the Aspinall fight would have a similar problem to this one, which is the double standard of the stakes. That you're talking about with Stipe. If Stipe loses, who cares? If Stipe wins, who cares? He drops the belt. This one, same thing. If Aspinall beats Jon Jones, you go, okay, you beat him at a different point of his career. You beat a guy who's ultimately supposed to be a light heavyweight, not a heavyweight. Go on down the line. All of the things that you've mentioned. Yes, there's stakes for Jones in terms of if he was able to do it, but I just don't think that it's nearly as compelling as the other one. Okay, a couple more quick ones from me. Go ahead.
Hold on. Wait a minute. I need just a moment. I have got to pay you some praise right now. I work in Bristol, Connecticut with the greatest of the greatest in sports, and nobody understands the concept that you just said. In fact, I've never heard somebody say it, but I know it to be true. You cannot have something big, the stakes. One guy's got to be able to raise, but there has to be a fall. There's got to be a discrepancy within the outcome. And promoters don't understand what you just said. That was brilliant. I don't want your audience to miss that. In sports, there's got to be stakes, and that's not just one guy gets something beautiful. The other guy has got to fall. There has to be risk.
Yeah, I don't see the risk here for Stipe, and I don't see a lot of risk for Jones in a fight with Aspinall. And part of the reason why, if I was him, I'd be like, yeah, I am less interested in this one. If I beat Pereira, it really does cement. I guess this is a follow to that, too. It really does seem to matter to him, the GOAT thing, right? Like, he's seemingly sort of obsessed with this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a very big deal. In fact, they gave it to Khabib. Khabib in his retirement fight actually asked for it. He retired out of nowhere. He was supposed to get to 30-0. It ends up at 29. He says, here's my hat. What's my hurry? And he says, but rankings room, please. This is the last time you could ever give it to me. It's the one thing I haven't ever got. Please give me the ranking. And they did it. Tuesday morning at 9 a.m., they say Khabib is number 1. They moved Jones down to number 2, and Jon Jones lost his mind. And he said, you do not get to go in front of me because you were polite and you asked for it. Here's the things I've done. And it meant a lot to me because the rankings really don't matter to the public. They don't even know where to find them. I'm a fighter and an analyst. I don't care about the rankings myself. But I probably would if I was Jon and I was number 1 and I lost the spot without head-to-head competition. I really thought it told us a lot about Jon as a competitor. And to your point, yes, the way the people look at him is priority number 1. That's in front of the money or that belt. How do the people look at him?
What kind of difference do the old gloves make? Do you know? Like, it really does seem, again, to an outsider who hasn't seen a lot of the information, that Jones was like, I want these gloves, and then the UFC gave them to them. And they said, yeah, you're Jon Jones, you're calling the shot here, so we're pivoting to this. Like, do you have any insight on this?
I would be stunned if that's accurate, but I've heard that same rumor. I've heard that it is Jon that asked for them. I have had both gloves. I own several pair of the old gloves because they let you keep them. I tried the new gloves on. When I tried the new gloves on, they wanted an analysis from me. When I tried them on, I didn't know why they were having me put them on. They hadn't told me that these are the new gloves. I didn't know they were different gloves. I don't know anything that's different about them. They weigh the same. They look the same. You got to put your same 5 fingers through the holes. I don't understand. Yeah. But allegedly, they curve a little bit. And that curve allegedly bends your finger so you can't quite go with a straight hand, which Jon counts on. Jon will do, from a boxing standpoint, he's got the longest reach in the organization for any size. He will throw a couple of punches, and he will leave his lead hand out with an open palm and just put it right on the guy's forehead. It's called measuring. But most guys don't measure because their arms aren't longer, so it would be a waste of sticking your arm out. Jon's is long enough that he can put a hand on your forehead. There's not a man in the company that can touch him. It's like that old cartoon where the guy would, he'd hold his hand on the other guy, get all revved up and be swinging and trying to come at him, but he just didn't have the reach. And I only share with you, maybe that's really important to Jon. I can't imagine that Jon would ask for this. For him to ask for it, they would have to get lawyers involved. They'd have to move up the chain. They'd have to then come into the New York State Athletic Commission and get them to make a change. I mean, that would be a colossal ask of Jon Jones, and it would be colossally difficult for me to think that someone at the UFC said, okay, I will undergo that ground swelling effort for reasons unknown. But that is the rumor. The rumor is that's exactly what happened. I have a real hard time believing it.
Well, here's the thing. Again, if you're Jones, narratives matter. So this sucks for him. And the reason why I asked it is, to me, this actually does dispel some of the notion that people will try. Some people are going to discredit Jones if he wins no matter what, right? A lot of people hate Jones. He's not their GOAT, or, they're going to try to poke holes in any of this. And if he beats Stipe, they're going to say, well, Stipe's old, blah, blah, blah. This is a fake heavyweight fight. This is a bit manufactured, blah, blah, blah. But one of the things I think people will now point to is the gloves. But the reason I asked it is because you're actually educated on it. And now it seems to me anyways that if you're listening to this, it's difficult for me to believe that this is going to have any real impact at all. If you're putting on the gloves and you can't tell the difference, sorry. I just can't say that that's a reason why Jones won this fight or had some kind of advantage in this fight, period. Sorry.
That's right.
Yeah.
No, that's exactly right. But he thinks it's different. There's another thing. Yeah. Apparently, there's 2 octagons. And they use a smaller octagon for certain venues where there's posts in the way. And then there's the bigger octagon. I didn't even know that. I've been in both of them. I didn't know I was in both of them. I don't know anything about that stuff when guys bring it up. Some guys say, well, the hand should be down, or you can't knee, or you should be able to kick to the body. I don't know a damn thing about it. I don't know what they're talking about or how it matters. But if it gets in a guy's head and it matters to him, it starts to become real. So, Dana says this too, by the way. He goes, I am dealing with artists, even if it's martial artists. And it's Dana's nice way of saying some of these guys are crazy.
Yeah.
I just have to accept it and move on and do my best to work within it. But this does seem like one that, I'm just trying to picture how this would happen. John sends a text message because he can't get anybody to take his phone calls. He puts that he wants gloves, which is not the organization's decision. It is the state athletic commissions that's on the other side of the country who doesn't need them. In fact, they were the last state to even come into the assembly. I mean, I'm just sharing with you. Yeah. There's a lot of moving parts that make – I think it's hard to believe. But if John would have put out the ultimate threat, I'm not doing it unless, maybe somebody did take that. It's a legal action that would be needed. I really have a hard time believing it went down like that.
Yeah, now I do too. It was a fun conspiracy while it lasted, though. Like I enjoyed it. You kind of ruined it, but that's fine. You
I did ruin it.
Yeah,
I did.
You kind of did. You kind of did. You should have been like, when I put those new gloves on, you could do it on others. I put those new gloves on. I said to myself, these are the perfect kind of gloves for a guy like Stipe. That's the way that you should have been presenting this. Okay, last one for me. The only reason I'm bringing him up is because Michael Chandler.
Moving forward, I'm going to change my answer, by the way, because you are right. When I put these on, the first thing I thought is it's the end of Jon Jones.
Yeah, buddy, do you want to be truthful or do you want to be a great storyteller? Like, what do you want to be? What's more important
you
to
don't let the truth get in the way of a good story. You're right.
Exactly. So I'm going to mention McGregor because this was supposed to be Chandler's fight, right? And I actually like this fight. I think a lot of UFC fans do. Like, this is a more, I don't want to say more compelling one. That's a lie. But, yeah, it's a good fight. Like, it's a really good fight, getting to see Charles Oliveira fight him. My thing is if Conor's still not making this work and Chandler's still doing the thing where he's like, I hope we fight and it still has to go through me. I don't know. People keep saying Conor's coming back. I've never felt less confident about that. So where are you at with this? Because you know things.
Yeah. It's very hard to imagine. Conor is a very big draw. When Conor pulled out of the Chandler fight for a discolored pinky toe, according to his Twitter account, that may or may not have been broken and may or not even been his. He didn't show himself attached to a toe. He just showed a purple pinky toe. That was kin to retirement. There will never be a situation when Conor going to a training camp is going to have less of an injury than a discolored pinky toe. But at the same time, when he pulled out, they were sitting on a $27 million gate. They had never broken 20 as an industry. So now you have the biggest box office of all time for a guy that has not won a fight in 5.5 years. And it's very relevant to say there was no championship on the line. There was no made-up title. There was no contendership. It didn't affect the ranking. As a matter of fact, they weren't even weighing in their weight class of 155. They made up a weight class to do the match. I mean, there was nothing about it that equaled big except Conor, and it turned out it was big. And you have to consider that if you're the promotion, if he was to ever come back and say, I want to do it as a promotion, it'd be very difficult to not say, okay. And there's so many things you can do with him. If you think he's going to flake out in the future, just don't main event him. Put him as the second one down. Put him as the third one down, right? The fool me once, fool me twice thing has to apply here regardless of the size of the gate. But we're not talking about contenderships. We're not talking about belts. We're not talking about anything that matters other than a little bit of entertainment from a guy that's funny on a microphone. He's not even that good of a fighter, but he's entertaining. And I'm just being real about it. Whether we get Conor or we don't get Conor, it doesn't make a bit of difference. Things have been great over here for the last 5 years, and one thing we haven't had is Conor.
Yeah, I can't disagree with any of that. I just know that even for me, there's just it's nostalgia. It's like you want to see The Walk one more time because you've been promised it so many times, and you just want to. Basically, his entire thing is when he goes out there, you get to remember the good feelings you had watching the rise of Conor McGregor. You're not going to see the comeback or whatever the things that he's kind of putting it out there as. And I'm not. I mean this sincerely. Was his toe in that state worse than what Jon Jones's toe is like for the rest of his life after you ripped it off?
Yeah, that was gruesome. I ripped his toe off and I threw it. I remember as I was throwing it into the second row, these kids were screaming. They were horrified. They were horrified. And one thing about that is they're looking at Jon. There was something known as a 12-6 elbow.
Yeah.
And this is what cost Jon a fight. He lost the fight due to the 12-6 elbow. They've changed that rule. So if you were to do that same fight now, it would be legal. And there's people talking about reopening the outcome of that fight, taking an actual government agency, holding a hearing and rechanging it. But I'll tell you one thing that is consistent, which is if you rip a guy's toe off, you win the fight. So if they're going to go back and revisit fights, feel free to let me know when they're going to hand over my actual belt. The linear champion.
I was
curious. You want to talk about not letting things get in the way of a story? That is exactly the way that went down.
Yeah, I was curious about that. I went back and looked at it again because I was like, I just don't remember this. And I looked at it as, God, that thing was disgusting. It's funny, too, because I'm sure you've seen it. He has a moment where, like, he looks at it, and then he gets sick and he needs to sit down. And then Rogan goes, "You want to do this?" And then he has to tough guy through it. Like, you're a UFC fighter. In that moment, you have to say, yes, it's fine. Let's do this thing. But there's a moment right before he does the interview with Rogan where he looks, sick. He's very, very, very upset. Also, you were very gracious in defeat. I got to say, it was a really good post-fight interview. I don't know if they would do it that way anymore. But yeah, that was a good one. Anyways, Chael, hey man, thank you so much for the time, especially on a week like this.
I've enjoyed you. You deserve more credit for saying that stakes thing. You blew over that. That's the smartest thing anybody has said in sports in a long time. This was fun. Yeah. Thank you. Goodbye. You've been trying to get off with me for 5 minutes.
That's
Goodbye.
not true.
I don't need you.
That's
I got fancy friends.
I know you do.
Goodbye.
I know you do. See you, buddy. Yeah, I thought he was going to do his fat and joke. He went with a different one.